I don't think there are many children that wouldn't want a tree house. This one is a shadow of its former self. It's almost 30 years old, but it certainly has earned its keep. And I might yet renovate it. I've designed loads and loads of tree houses, including the first ever one at Chelsea Flower Show. Tree houses have been built all over the world and they've been around for hundreds of years. There's still one standing that was built in the 1700s at Pitchford Hall in Shropshire. One tree house I saw was a converted dog kennel, and what they'd done is they'd literally suspended it between two trees and it worked perfectly. It was a fantastic little tree house. But if you're going to build a tree house, there's a few points that you need to know. Firstly, you rarely get a tree with a wide spreading trunk that you can actually fit the tree house into. Mostly you can either pop them between two trunks and you actually then support the tree house between the two trees, which can work really well. Sometimes we've built them out over a limb, but then we also need to add additional support to the tree house. And then you can actually build them around the trunk of the tree. And this one, we actually cut the platform around the trunk of the ash tree behind me. But whatever system you use, and you might just build a hedge house, you might actually have a freestanding platform that you build and you plant basically a tall hedge around it. And you can see these hazels here. If we didn't have the tree behind us, if it was a slightly smaller tree house, they would actually do quite a nice job at just building the tree house into the branches. And that's a very effective way to do it. Now you might be lucky and have an actual choice of tree for which you can build your tree house in, but you do really want to avoid very fast growing trees such as willows, robinias, horse chestnut. All those trees tend to grow quite fast, and trees that grow quite fast tend to lose limbs for unexpected reasons and they can just drop off. So I always try and avoid those trees if I can. And also, if you're building a platform in a tree that's growing fast, it won't be long before you see your tree house is actually quite distorted and growing out of true. Whereas if you choose a tree that's quite elderly but still in sound health, then it's obviously going to be growing much more slowly and you won't get that distortion. So choice of tree is really important. And if your tree's got a tree preservation order on it in the UK, then obviously you certainly wouldn't want to build a tree house in that. And if you're in a conservation area, you would need to be very careful too. And at the same time, I think you need to consider planning, because in the UK, it's quite a flexible item as to whether or not you need a planning permission for your tree house. In other words, the planning law is written that it's widely open to interpretation. So in some boroughs, I've had to go for planning permission for certain structures, and then in other boroughs for the same structure I haven't. So it's just worth checking it down, because there have been many cases where tree houses have had to be pulled down because they are not legally allowed to be there. And that's for obvious reasons, because there's a lot of overlooking with tree houses. You've got a high vantage point, you can look into other people's gardens, they also can look at you and they might not want to look at your tree house. So do be considerate, do check out all the legislation before you go full out and start building one. One of the things that I like about tree houses is because they're slightly higher up, they're often out of the general eye level, so they're easier to camouflage in them. Now, not only is this nicer for the children who are playing in them, they can't necessarily be watched by adults and things, but also visually in the garden, they're not so intrusive. So I think there are quite a few advantages to the higher level of the platform, and you can use that to your advantage when you're designing one too. When you're trying to accommodate the tree house within the tree, you might have to remove the odd branch. In fact, it's unusual that you won't have to. And this can be done quite safely without damaging the tree too much. But you also need to think how you're going to actually fix the platform into the tree. Now, If you're using something like a pallet and you're fixing it into the tree, then there's a chance that it might be rubbing against the tree. So you want to really pad it well in that case. Also, you might not want to lash it. Many people think if you just lash the pallet to the tree using rope, that's fine. But the problem is those ropes will get tighter as the tree grows, as it's expanding in the girth, and tight ropes are very difficult sometimes to loosen. So the general thought is, when I've consulted with tree surgeons and people like that, if you had the odd screw fixing, obviously shouldn't be copper, into the tree, then that actually causes it less damage than tying ropes and things around it, which potentially might not get loosened 10, 15 years down the line when your children and you have forgotten all about it. So with this tree house, when we built it, we actually put the posts into the ground and they're fixed into the ground with concrete. Now, when you're actually positioning the posts in the ground and you want the posts to be at equal distances, set positions, when you dig that position, you might well find you come across a major root or a root. So try and position the post so you're not going through major roots. It's probably likely that you're going to go through some roots, so you will have some damage to the root system. So just bear that in mind. And when the tree's coming out and into leaf, and maybe it's a dry spring, if you have severed some roots, just compensate by giving the tree perhaps some water to help it balance and establish new root growth. But it's unlikely you're going to do severe damage to the tree just by 6 holes, but just be thoughtful of what you're doing it when you're doing it. If you've got quite young children, then you might have an old apple tree that's ideal, and you might want the platform just 3 foot or so off the ground. And then later on, when your children are larger, if you have a platform that's 1.8 or 2 meters off the ground, then that provides a lot of acceleration potentially. But if you are thinking of the safety surface underneath it, particularly when the children are young, just remember that grass in dry summers has the hardness and can have the same impact as something like concrete. So what you might consider doing is putting a deep safety surface of bark underneath it, or those plastic safety mats that you can just put on top of the grass. The grass grows through it, and then it's really quite a good safety surface just in case they should fall. There are quite a few safety considerations when you're doing a tree house. So we've mentioned the height, things like the ladder rungs. So these rungs are just rounded on the outside so that children can grasp them as they're climbing up it. And then you will often need, or pretty much always need, a balustrade around the platform, things like these, and they should have a distance no greater than 100 mil between the balustrade upright, so you can't get your head or something caught between it. And that balustrade should really be something like 900 or 1.1 meters high, really, depending on the side of the child, but it really does need to be safe. Sometimes if we're doing a more open design of balustrade, such as just plain crosses, then we'll put something like a camouflage net behind it, which achieves the same effect. But what you don't want is to have a balustrade that has horizontal rungs, because then the child can potentially climb up and over it and fall off the other side. So you need to think carefully about safety, because safety is important. And I think when you're designing any play equipment for children, you've got to bear in mind that they develop very fast and they soon become bored with something, so they start using it for things it's not really designed for. Children are continually wanting new challenges, so don't give them everything all at once. Add additional items to your treehouse, maybe a pulley so they can bring a basket with a sandwich and a bottle of squash or something up into it. Maybe put bunks into the treehouse so they can have sleepovers. Maybe put a slide coming down off it, a swing underneath, or a hammock. There are endless things that you can add to a tree house that will maintain their interest, and just slowly do it. Ask them what they like, design it with them, and it makes it much more fun and it makes it much more satisfying for you and the children. So we built this tree house for a book. We did it as a step-by-step project in a book. basically what we've done is we've made a platform supported on 6 posts, and then we've put decking along the platform, over the platform. We've put the balustrade around the edge, and then we built a plywood treehouse on the back section, so it had an open balcony and then the treehouse behind. And although the treehouse was made of ply, and we used Far Eastern ply. Now, Far Eastern ply lasts longer than cheaper ply. It doesn't last as long as marine ply, which is what they make boats and things out of, but it's less expensive than marine ply. So basically we made a box out of Far Eastern ply, and then we had Far Eastern ply as sheets on the roof, and then we clad it all so it looked like a totally different finish. So we had beech tree log rounds on one side, which we fitted together like a jigsaw, and we just bashed them onto the ply with small nails. Another side of the roof, we just got hazel ones, which we cut when the hazel was dormant, because then they last longer, and we just nailed them on with panel pins side by side all the way on top of the ply. We just did all different finishes to show exactly what you could make ply look like that was slightly better looking than ordinary old ply. We made wooden doors and trellis for the windows using acrylic sheeting to keep it watertight. And on the roof we got willow wands, and again we just put them on with panel pins. We put rope to fix the willow wands from the outside, and so it looked like it was almost thatched with willow. So it was very simple, very inexpensive to do, but it was really quite effective. Now, we pretty much did the same approach when we did the tree house for Chelsea, but that tree house was slightly different, and that it was going to last for a week, although in fact it went to someone's garden and lasted for many, many years. But it was still basically made of ply, but we rendered it to make it look more attractive. Now, with hindsight, we could have actually just painted the ply and paint it with masonry paint. So you add a bit of sand to the paint so it has a bit of texture to it. And then we made wooden coins on the end so it looked like there was stone with render. But it wasn't, it was just ply with coins stuck on and then a masonry paint put on the top. But we had a pitched roof on that, and we put, I think there were timber shingles on the roof. And that was all about making a tree house for adults. It was time when people were starting to work from home. That must have been about 28 years ago. And so we built this little home office up the steps with a moat around the outside so that you could work from the office without your children coming to say, "Mommy, can you come and play with me?" or whatever. So you could be left in peace with the moat, cutting you off from the outside world. And that was interesting in that we did actually support quite a bit of the tree house by the tree, but we had to find an old tree which we could lift, bring through London on a big lorry without a police escort, because our budget was quite tight. And luckily at the farm next door at Sackwell Farm, they had a tree which was in an avenue. It was misshapen, so it wasn't good for the avenue. They wanted to get rid of it, and so we got a big tree remover, a tree spade, and we lifted the root ball up. We took it on a lorry to a nursery. We kept it there for a couple of months, and then we moved it to Chelsea at mid-April, I think it was. And it was lovely. It burst into leaf just in time for Chelsea at the end of May. And it was one of probably the most nail-biting Chelseas I've ever done, because we weren't sure that the tree was really going to survive and recuperate well, even though we'd taken every care with lifting it. But it did. It looked wonderful. And I think it was the most photographed garden of Chelsea that year. My heart was in my mouth on press day because all the press were teaming up there. And I designed this load for the tree house to be 3 or 4 people, and at times you were having to sort of push people down and say, "No more here, please," because there were just too many celebs in high heels tottering up the ladder with glasses of champagne, and it did look like it could be a disaster in the making. But anyway, it all ended well, and then at the end of Chelsea it came down and went back to someone's garden, so it was a nice ending. So if you do feel inspired to build a tree house, we did do a proper step-by-step in Garden Workshop, a book I wrote some years ago, and it has a cutting list of everything you need to make it. It's got step-by-step photographs, and then we've also done a step-by-step of a much smaller children's one, a much simpler one in the Family Gardens book, which I also wrote a fair few years ago. But however you want to build one, they are great fun. You'll get many years out of them. And I think I really do feel inspired to make this back into a nice little den, perhaps for my grandchild.